Hey, welcome to Beat Everyone, everybody. I'm Ben Flanagan with AL.com. And we're trying something a little different today, but I think it's something you're going to have a lot of fun with. We're looking at the AL.com Alabama Football Hall of Fame. And the idea here, we're going to do kind of a series and we're going to start big. We're starting with Nick Saban. So we're creating the Nick Saban Hall of Fame. And what we're doing is we're focusing on one person per episode. We're picking the 10 most important moments, games, plays, whatever of their Alabama career. We are solidifying why these moments belong in that individual person's Hall of Fame, but also in the Alabama Hall of Fame. So this is exciting because we're starting with the greatest of all time, the central figure in the latest golden age of Alabama football and college sports to a large degree. And so we're going to go one by one here, and helping me to do that is our good friend, show producer, Matt Scalici. Matt, what do you think of this idea and how are you doing?
I'm good, Ben. I think this is a good way to approach it because, actually when we were working on making this list, some of the items that came up for me, it's like, well, was this a big deal for Alabama during the Saban era, or was this a big deal for Nick Saban? Does this go in Nick Saban's College Football Hall of Fame record? Does this go up on the big plaque that they create for the coaches in that College Football Hall of Fame rotunda up there? And I think it's an interesting distinction, but like this is an opportunity, I think, for us to talk about actions he took, decisions he made that show why he's the greatest of all time.
Yeah, and it's important to be as thorough as possible because the 17 years that he was at Alabama, you could literally go from 2017 to 2007 to 2023 and really pick something from each season
For
that
sure.
could be part of the top 10. There are multiple things per one season, and we're going to get into that in just a minute that should be in this top 10. But it's basically like, what are the most defining things that happened at Alabama that he was directly responsible for, that sort of reflect, like you said, like why he's the greatest, and basically his biggest achievements or most important, again, moments or games or accomplishments that reinforce sort of his GOAT status. And so I think everybody's going to have like heavy opinions on this and like what should be included. People are going to call us idiots for some of the things that we pick here on this list, but Matt and I each get five, and they're different. We talked about this ahead of time so that we didn't have any crossover, and there's so much to choose from. And I have some honorable mentions that I'm going to share at the end of this, and maybe you do too, Matt. But why don't we get started? Let's go through the Nick Saban Hall of Fame, the 10 best moments while he was the Alabama head coach. Matt, I'll let you go first.
All right, Ben. I think what I'm starting with here is I'm going all the way back to really what I would say. I mean, there's a lot of points at which you could call it the beginning of the Saban dynasty, the beginning of Alabama's dominance under Nick Saban. To me, the one that made it really feel as though it was undeniable, as though this is really happening. This is not another fluke. Alabama is a force in college football going forward. Was the blackout game against Georgia in 2008? I think there were hints of it earlier. I think you could even maybe even a couple of moments in 2007, but that season opener against Clemson was a big deal. It felt different. It felt weirdly dominant for Alabama, given the maybe a couple of decades leading up to it. But that Georgia game, it was impossible to ignore or write off or say this doesn't mean anything. This is one game. It was so powerfully dominant. It was on the road. It was in an atmosphere that was undeniably a difficult atmosphere to play in. The crowd was out of their minds, and none of it mattered. and Alabama went in there and it was a blowout. It was the way it was the way that I think you see Alabama handle a an FCS opponent today. And they were playing against Georgia. They were playing against Mark Richt, who had well established his program at that point, had all of his guys in there. I think there were a number of future NFL players on that Georgia roster, but it was the moment where you looked at Alabama and said, this is going to be one of the teams that we have to pay attention to for the national title race.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, I think that you have to make the case if you're going to pick a game from this era. You mentioned it, the Clemson game, right? Because you've got to make a case Clemson versus Georgia as the most important moment, and I believe in both. And I'm totally fine with this pick because of how monumental it felt. Because what it was confirmation, the confirmation that this Alabama team is for real. Alabama under Nick Saban is different, and they're a monster. The Clemson game to me was more of a signifying of a reemergence of Alabama. And with games like that to start the season, it could be fool's gold. I mean, there have been plenty of games where like LSU beats Texas and everybody, or Texas beats LSU and everybody says Texas is back and it's the first or
Right.
second game of the season. And then they end up going 6-6 and they stink, right? So that could have happened for Alabama too. It could have happened, but they blew out what everybody thought was a good Clemson team and they just kept rolling, including this Georgia game. And you're right. I think it was the atmosphere. It was the talent that Georgia had, obviously, like no Sean Marino. I believe Matthew Stafford was still the quarterback. We're going to be the number one overall draft pick. And it looked like an impossible place to win. And Alabama just came in there and did whatever they wanted for one half of football and was up 31-0 at the half. And so it was a disgusting act what they did there in Athens, but so satisfying for Alabama fans in a way that I don't think they ever thought they would be satisfied in their lives again.
A great defensive game from Alabama that I think established that 2008 defense as really scary and powerful. But I think probably in people's lasting memory, and certainly the Daniel Moore painting that came from that game, was a lot more focused on Julio Jones. And he made some plays earlier in the season. There are some big plays by him in the Clemson game, but that Georgia game, I think, really was the moment that Julio Jones became a superstar for Alabama.
So that gets to my first pick, Matt. My first pick on this list, my first entry into the Nick Saban Hall of Fame, is the signing of Julio Jones as the star of the historic 2008 recruiting class. And you can go up and down that class and see why it was so critical. And we'll get into at least one more name. But I mean, guys like Dante Hightower, guys like Marcel Darius, Courtney Upshaw, Mark Barron. Again, I could keep going. And there are such huge reasons, not only why Alabama would win a national championship the next year, why they would go undefeated that season, but why Alabama became a dominant superpower in not just college football, but sports, and why they became a dynasty. And Julio Jones was so big in terms of the impact that he had that, okay, well, if Julio's going there, this guy who is considered by everybody pretty much to be the best football player in the country, then others will follow. And they did, including somebody from his own school, Robert, Lester,
Yeah.
the safety who came with him. And Julio just was a guy that everybody knew would probably deliver on his hype, and he did in so many ways, and he did even more so at the next level when he reached the NFL. But to me, that signing and really that class is Saban's sort of masterpiece as a mover and shaker behind the scenes, as a program builder, as somebody who can change your fortune, not overnight, but because so much went into it. But as somebody who was to use kind of a cliched term based on the documentary, the propaganda documentary that was made for him, but as a game
That's right.
changer, essentially, and an icon of the sport. And the reputation that he had was he's a recruiter first, right? Like Saban always loved recruiting, and this class was proof positive that he was the best in the business, and Alabama really never had to worry about a thing again when it came to recruiting.
Yeah. And, I think also up to that point, recruiting just hadn't really been a mainstream part of the fan culture for Alabama. I think that you could argue the few years leading up to that, and Andre Smith had a lot to do with that coming in. It was sort of one of the first big star recruits that committed to come to Alabama. But the recruiting internet industry, I think, was really starting to hit its stride, and I say that as somebody that worked for that industry at the time. But it was a combination of a lot of things all hitting at once, right? I mean, people were a little bit more aware of the recruiting side of college football. Internet message boards were becoming probably something that was more used by a larger percentage of the fan base at the time. It starts getting talked about on talk radio, a little bit on ESPN. That's when they start showing some of these signing ceremonies on TV.
They start live streaming the fax machine at Alabama to show
That's
which
right.
letters of intent have come in.
I think that was a couple years later, but you think about YouTube, Ben. I mean, YouTube basically was still very brand new in 2008, and that I think drives recruiting into a new level of interest too, because people are putting their recruiting highlight reels on YouTube for the first time. It's no longer reading in some little paper pamphlet that that Joe, recruiting analyst, says that Julio Jones is the best wide receiver he's seen coming out of high school in 15 years. Now everybody can go on YouTube and play this kid's highlight reel, and you're watching this 6'4", 220-pound 18-year-old absolutely mossing kids in 7-on-7 games, at skills camps, not to mention his high school highlights where he's also playing defensive back, by the way, and getting tons of interceptions and returning them for touchdowns. So you people can start to actually feel this like visceral excitement about players who are still in high school. And I think that was a very new thing in 2008 still. And it just sort of all hit at the right moment for Julio Jones coming to Alabama.
Huge chain reaction in of Alabama suddenly was going to get this influx of five-star guys. And again, like I said, Alabama, you really never had to worry about recruiting anymore. There were plenty of people who still hung on to every word and to every star and to every player, but it was kind of an afterthought after a certain point with Nick Saban. He was going to get the guys that he wanted. And with a guy like Julio Jones, it was just like Alabama fans couldn't believe a guy like that would come there, even at Alabama, just after the period where they're watching programs like Miami. They're watching programs like Florida, programs like USC. That's where guys like Julio Jones were going. And suddenly they're coming to Alabama. And there, like I said, there would be more to follow. It was like, you cannot overstate how huge that signing was.
Yep, shifted the gravity, the center of gravity in college football for
All
sure.
right, Matt, what's your next pick?
I'm staying chronological with it. I'm moving 1 year later to 2009, which obviously, Ben, we established a rule for me and you going into this, that we were going to try to only pick one national title each on our lists here. So I'm not going with the 2009 national title. I'm going with the 2009 SEC championship game in
Mm-hmm.
which Alabama took down the Florida Gators and Tim Tebow, which felt, I think, for a lot of fans, as though it were a sort of de facto national title game. I mean, I think not to downplay how big a deal it was to play against Texas and actually get handed the trophy, but Florida felt like such an obstacle. It felt like the biggest hurdle that Alabama had to clear to return to the top in college football. How can you be the best in the country if you're not the best in your own conference? And that wasn't an easy task. Florida was a few years ahead of what Nick Saban was doing in terms of stocking their roster with five stars. They had an incredible amount of talent on that team. So many of those guys went on to play in the NFL, and they seemed pretty unbeatable. I mean, they had lost one or two games maybe in the previous two seasons. They were an unstoppable machine, but they just didn't quite have enough answers for Alabama in that game. I think that the 2009 Alabama team had learned from what happened the year before. They had added another incredible recruiting class to the roster. And I think at that point, you go from, boy, stopping Mark Ingram is really tough, to now you have to stop Mark Ingram and Trent Richardson. They go from having to deal with Julio Jones to also having to deal with a whole other class, adding 3, 4 other incredible receivers, a defense that had matured even more and understood that very complex system that Nick Saban and Kirby Smart were running, and what they were asking of them. And they just finally looked like they were clearly the better program. They had surpassed Florida, and it felt really monumental. I think even for people who believed in that Alabama team, even the fans who were confident and felt great about them, it felt almost surreal to see Alabama dismantling Florida like that. And I mean, it wasn't the kind of blowout that 2008 Georgia game was, but they sort of felt like they were keeping their hand on anything Florida was trying to do. They just never really let Florida catch their breath in that game.
Yep, they kept their foot on their throat, is what you're saying, and
Yeah.
that was their entire season in 2009. It honestly, I think I've even heard players say that like it didn't matter after that; they had to beat Florida. I mean, going undefeated is one thing, but to get to Florida, they probably
I
had to go undefeated in the
I think
SEC.
Greg McElroy told us that last summer
Yeah,
at SEC Media Days. Yeah, I said something to that effect.
yeah, and that's the way it is. To be the man, you got to beat the man, right? To use that old Ric Flair saying. But it was amazing to watch. I mean, because like you said, in these early picks of the Nick Saban Hall of Fame that we're doing here, the word that you used was surreal. And I think like the Julio Jones thing, the blackout game, the Clemson game, this Florida game, throttling them in the SEC championship to reach the national title game, it all felt surreal to this fan base that had been starved for this for 2 decades. After they had last won a national championship under Gene Stallings, and so I'm fully with you, but they just seemed evenly matched at that point, and it was a great game in 2008, and it was a back and forth, but Florida just had that knockout punch in Tim Tebow that Alabama could not muster. And then in 2009, it was just, maybe some people would say it wasn't really a fair fight with all the talent that Alabama had and how they had developed that 2008 recruiting class and just what all Nick Saban and his staff were building at that point. It was unbelievable to watch. And honestly, Matt, it leads me again into my next pick here. And we're going to stay in 2009. And for me, Mark Ingram winning the Heisman Trophy was such an important moment for Nick Saban, but also Alabama, but him specifically because it was another example of him redefining Alabama football. Because Alabama had never won a Heisman Trophy. It had never happened. And that started to become this award that Alabama fans pretended not to care about, right? That they would say, we'd rather win games. We'd rather win national championships than any individual trophy. But once a Heisman Trophy was on the table, that tune obviously changed where it's like, well, let's just win everything. Let's just we
Yeah.
want it all. We don't just want championships. We want to kill you, which they were doing pretty much every game. We want to win all the games, which they did. We won all the championships, which they did. And we won all the trophies too. And we won all the individual accolades. We won all the recruits, et cetera. And so Mark Ingram, I think for me, he's a top 5 favorite player just to watch, his personality, yes, but just to watch that guy play on the field. Nobody worked harder than him. He bounced off of tackles. He was impossible to bring down, even somebody of his stature, because not the biggest guy in the world, but he again, he reflected the sort of toughness and relentless competition that Nick Saban would always preach about. And so Mark Ingram was Alabama football personified in the eyes of Nick Saban. And the fact that he won that award, that seems surreal too. And that seemed like something that would never happen in our lifetimes. And once it did, the floodgates just continued to open when it came to Heisman trophies, when it came to Alabama as this national and then ultimately this global brand. Alabama became synonymous with winning. It became synonymous with college football. And a big part of that was because Nick Saban recruited a guy like Mark Ingram, developed a guy like Mark Ingram, developed a team that could help Mark Ingram win the most prestigious trophy in all of sports. So to me, this moment, even though Alabama would win 3 more of these, 4 under Nick Saban, to me, the first Heisman Trophy win was so important that it belongs in the Nick Saban Hall of Fame.
I do agree. And I think it's actually, even though, Ben, as you pointed out, a lot of people love to talk about that it's an individual award and it doesn't really mean as much in a team context. But I do think it's a key part of building a dominant program. I think that winning a Heisman is good for the team, in part because, especially in the modern era, I mean, there's an attention aspect to succeeding in college football. You want to be the team that's always being talked about. You want to be taking up all the oxygen in the room in college football. And that was a big part of what Alabama did so successfully early on, is they became the most talked about team. It went from, if you were an Alabama fan, in the mid 2000s, and you came home and you watched Pardon the Interruption or Around the Horn every afternoon on ESPN. I mean, if they talked about Alabama once in a year, you would call everyone and say, you got to catch the repeat. They talked about Alabama for a second. Suddenly, they're being talked about every day on these shows. They are the main conversation about college football. And winning a Heisman is a big part of that. It means that you were the sort of dominant talking point in the sport, and they did some things to aid that. I think Mark Ingram, had a sort of spectacular Heisman moment against South Carolina where he just completely took over the game and was unstoppable. But one thing that was really funny about that year, Ben, a lot of people, fans of other teams, look back sometimes and will point to Mark Ingram as one of the guys they love to say was an undeserving Heisman or an overrated Heisman winner. When you look at his numbers and his performance, and I have to say, I think that take really does not hold up well today. If you look at his numbers, Mark Ingram had 1,658 rushing yards in 2009, the year he won the Heisman. That's 6.1 yards per carry on the ground, 17 rushing touchdowns. Ben, every team in college football today would kill for a 1,600-yard rusher. That is an incredibly rare feat. And I understand that offense has changed a little bit, but it's just not, I mean, on a per carry basis, he was a dominant offensive weapon that not really many teams had any answer for in 2009.
Well, he was the best player on the best team, and that's sometimes how people vote. Alabama was undefeated, and he was rolling through everybody, putting up big numbers. But that happens in professional sports a lot of the time too, and there's no clear-cut favorite. They say who's the best guy on the best team, and often is the case that person wins. But Ingram was a deserving winner,
I think so too.
He's been a great representative of the Heisman fraternity or whatever. Like, he's a proud winner, and he's always a funny guy, and he's the king.
I think by the way, not that this justifies a Heisman, but Mark Ingram had a totally respectable pro career, by the way. And I would say probably in the upper half of Heisman winners in terms of his success at the professional level.
And great speech too. Go back and watch the Mark Ingram Heisman speech. Tears in his eyes. He'll put them in yours. All right, Matt, let's go to yours.
All right, Ben. My next one is a very off-field pick here, but it's been talked about both by Saban and others as a major moment for Nick Saban in his time at Alabama, and really in his entire life, personally and professionally. And it is the 2011 tornado that struck Tuscaloosa on April 27th of that year, really middle of the off season. But a lot of the guys were on campus, most of the players still in school at that point. Nick Saban and his family are there. And for people who lived in the state, I mean, and particularly people who were in Tuscaloosa at the time, as I know you were, Ben, it was not business as usual. It is hopefully a once in a lifetime kind of event that happens, that was just completely devastating. And it changes, I think, anybody who lived through it and lived through that day concerned for themselves or for the people that they cared about, and for their community. And I think Nick Saban has often said, you know, that the way that his team approached helping the community in the aftermath of that tornado was very impactful on him. And obviously, Nick and Terry Saban, I think, made a big commitment to helping the community as well afterwards, and the community badly needed it. I mean, this was a storm for people who are maybe weren't around at the time, or if you're a younger fan. I mean, this is, I know we get tornado warnings every year. This was a different situation. There were dozens of fatalities in Tuscaloosa. I mean, I think well over 1,000 people injured by this storm, billions of dollars of damage to the city, by the way. I mean, it wiped whole streets off the map. I mean, it was a shocking, devastating thing. And if you were there, if you were a part of it, I think you couldn't help but feel like this became the most important thing in your life all of a sudden. Football doesn't matter, recruiting doesn't matter anymore. This is a community that you're a part of that needs you. And Alabama football stepped up big. Nick Saban and his family stepped up big. Not to mention former coaches. There's that famous image I always think of Gene Stallings standing out on 15th Street cooking hamburgers and hot dogs for people, just like doing whatever you can do to help in a situation like that. I think it was a life altering moment for Nick Saban, and I think the community will also always remember the way that Saban stepped up in that moment.
I think it's a great pick, Matt, because Saban's time in Alabama was marked by his and his wife and their staffs, friends, players, efforts when it came to community service. And you hear phrases like Nick's Kids, which is a foundation that they ran that helps a lot of people. Things like there were the Saban Center, which is being constructed right now in Tuscaloosa. But back then and up to this point, like they put forth a great effort to rebuild aspects of Tuscaloosa, and that included being part of Habitat for Humanity and rebuilding homes in the Alberta area and other parts of Tuscaloosa. And on a football note, Matt, I mean, they wore houndstooth ribbon decals on the back of their helmets in the 2011 season. They went on to win the national championship.
That's right.
And in a lot of ways, that season was marked by how the tornado impacted the community and impacted the players, along with the head coach, who basically made that part of their goal and their immersion in Tuscaloosa to be part of that place and to be part of the rebuilding effort that, attempted to make Tuscaloosa whole again. So I think it's a great pick. And it's one I think that people might forget at times. So it's a good reminder that this moment, as you mentioned, that was so devastating and so monumental for so many reasons. It's good to remind people of I think Alabama football's role in that. They're part of that story, to say the least. So that's a good pick. I'm going to go back a couple of spots here, Matt. We were talking about 2009, so I'm going to stick with 2009 for just a second, and just to make sure we check this box, because the first national title win has to be on this list.
I agree. I'm just glad. I'm going to let you do it.
No, sure, but I mean, it's Alabama's. It was his first season where they finished undefeated and they won a national championship. And I mentioned the Heisman Trophy. You mentioned the SEC championship. Those are critical moments that make all of it happen. And you could argue that the Florida game was even more important in some ways than the national championship against Texas, but they had to get it done. They had to win it. And it was really the national championship victory that launched what they were trying to build, that launched this new era of what became another Alabama football dynasty. And it was a really exciting game. And Alabama made it one-sided in the sense that Colt McCoy obviously got knocked out, and we can relitigate everything that happened in the game and what woulda, coulda, shoulda, what if, et cetera. But the fact is that Alabama ended up dominating the game, and they won it in ways that they had won all season. Mark Ingram and Trent Richardson had huge games. The defense came up with big stops and interceptions and unbelievable plays like the Marcel Darius pick six that just sounded like something out of Greek mythology. And it was just it was impressive because it was on the grandest stage, right at the Rose Bowl against another classic, traditionally respected team like Texas. It was just two college football historic heavyweights trading blows and delivering another great game and giving Alabama and Nick Saban their first national title. And we've picked a lot from 2009, but all of them are deserving. And I wouldn't change a thing. I wouldn't take any of them off of this list. So the first national title, which would obviously be the first of 6 while he was the head coach at Alabama, it's got to be on there.
I'm with that pick. I think I agree that it has to be on there. And if you and I set ourselves this limit of we're picking one each, I'm glad that you picked first. I think it's tough, right? If we're trying to pick one title that's most representative, I think there's something unique and cool about all of them. I go back to the one that I felt I decided to go with the one that I felt like was the best example of Nick Saban impacting a game. And I mean, again, you could probably make a similar case for some of the other ones. To me, 2015 is the one that I think of as a moment where Nick Saban impacted what was happening on the field that day directly the most. And it's firstly a spectacular game, probably the best and most exciting overall game that Alabama played in terms of national title games. I mean, you have a 45-40 final score against Clemson, against the Heisman Trophy winner versus the runner-up for the Heisman. Derrick Henry opens the game with a 50-yard touchdown. Alabama basically seals the win with a 95-yard kick return for a touchdown. So many the OJ, 250-plus yard touchdowns for OJ Howard. Just so many huge, spectacular. I mean, the game itself is a highlight reel. But the single most memorable moment from the whole game, I think you can argue, is an onside kick call by Nick Saban that I think really comes to mind when I try to think of when does the head coach make his presence felt on the field. And it's a moment where I don't think very many other coaches would have made that decision to go for the onside kick there. It's risky, but it's also called at the exact right moment for the right reason, to sort of take away the advantage and break serve against Clemson in this back and forth game. It's so perfectly executed. And I think on top of it all, there's that moment that comes out of it of Nick Saban grinning over his shoulder that he's pulled this off, while there's a split screen of Dabo yelling at the ref, totally flustered by what's just happened. It's just hard not to look back at that and think that's a moment where the head coach basically scored points for his team.
Such a great pick, Matt. In that moment, other than Saban benching Jalen Hurts for Tua.
Yeah, and it's hard not to point to that moment too, because that was hugely consequential. This just felt like such a specific. I mean, this is like a play call.
Yeah,
it's such a specific moment.
Yeah. No. What I'm saying is like it's hard for me to pick. Obviously, switching quarterbacks, most people are going to call that like the more important move or whatever. But you're right, like the exact timing of it and the shot, giving Alabama the shot in the arm that they needed because Clemson was gaining on them and they had all the momentum and it looked bad for Alabama in that moment. And also putting it in the hand or on the foot of a kicker, right? Like relying on a kicker to turn the game around for you and to do it in a way that I had personally never seen done before. We've always seen onside kicks where they just kick little dribblers and hope they get a bounce and maybe they recover it. I had never seen the pop fly where your player is the only guy near the ball and runs out of bounds with it And that's why Dabo Swinney freaked out the way that he did, because he probably had never seen it either and thought it was an illegal play. But obviously they had practiced that thing until they perfected it. And you're right. The execution of that could not have been better.
Yeah. A real, he can't do that type of moment.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. I mean, it became a meme too. I think anytime after that, even beyond Saban, anytime Alabama does something that infuriates the other team, you will see that image of Saban grinning over his shoulder.
Yeah, for sure. And we see a lot of people reshare that image a lot. But like, there are a lot of people in the Alabama fan base who are not Dabo Swinney fans, right? And they never want him to be the coach at Alabama. And they think he's a goober, and they love to watch him get upset. That to me has to be like the most satisfying moment of those people's sort of like lifetime hatred of Dabo Swinney. I don't mind Dabo Swinney, so like I don't really view it that way. But he threw the biggest hissy fit after that play. And but you're right. Like, if we're just talking about the game itself, though, it had everything, and it was huge, and it was Alabama's first playoff victory. It was the second year of the college football playoff, and they had gotten embarrassed by Ohio State in the semifinal the year before, and they came back with a vengeance, and it was impressive.
Ben, whenever inevitably there's a big boxing match on, that casual fans who don't normally pay attention to boxing have on, you'll often hear them talk about how boring it is to watch these guys playing this sort of very technical style of fighting, where it's about, just landing hits at the right moment and staying clean. And then you've got the stuff that casual fans love, which is just two heavyweights trading blows, just smacking each other in the face over and over again. And that's what this game was. This was just two incredible offenses going toe to toe with each other, and two defenses with a ton of talent making plays. That every time you make a big play on defense, it's so consequential, because stopping a score, forcing a punt ever, was a huge win in a game like this.
Awesome. Great pick. All right, Matt, I'm going to go back another year in my picks. I'm going to go back to 2008. Like I said, a lot of my picks are a little early in the Nick Saban dynasty, or I'm sorry, his coaching tenure in Tuscaloosa. But this is not a game necessarily. This is not a play. This is more of a moment here. And bear with me, because I think that this moment is indicative of Nick Saban's coaching style, his approach, his philosophy, his impact on players, his ability to motivate, and all of that leading to winning and success. And for me, the speech where he told players, make his ass quit, belongs in the Hall of Fame. And I'll just read you the quote right now. Quote, how much does this game mean to you? Because if it means something to you, you can't stand still. You understand? You play fast, you play strong, you go out there and dominate the guy you're playing against and make his ass quit. That's our trademark. That's our MO as a team. That's what people know us as. And I know Alabama fans are imagining Nick Saban saying this instead of me right now, and they're ready to bust through a brick wall. And there's good reason for that too, because, like, this was more than just beating his former team in their own stadium. Like, that obviously meant something to Nick Saban at the time, and it was the first time he beat LSU in 2008. But, this speech to me is something that has become representative of Nick Saban's entire tenure in Tuscaloosa. Like, to me, this is maybe the real origin of the phrase joyless murder ball, right? That a lot of people like toss around when it comes to Alabama. I could have picked his intro press conference too, Matt, and that's in my
it's a great one,
because that press conference is such a great microcosm of his philosophy. And he said exactly what he wanted to do and what he was going to do when he was hired to be the coach. And he said things like, we're going to be this type of team. We're going to be tough. We're going to make them quit, blah, blah, blah. But this is like in game, right before they go out on the field. It's mid-season. It's the most important, moment of or game of the season. He's talking directly to these guys, getting them ready to get out there and battle one of the best teams in the country. and the level of intensity that resonated with those guys to go out there and play in this overtime instant classic. It's something that will withstand the test of time, and it's something that they're going to play over the PA in Bryant-Denny Stadium probably forever. So I think that this belongs because there is nothing that he said during his entire tenure at Alabama that will mean more to Alabama football and its fan base than make his ass quit.
Ben, I'm going to give Yay Alabama a free fundraising idea right now.
Let's hear it.
Put up a streaming platform that all it has, because I know you have it in your archives, all it has is the video of every pregame and halftime speech that Nick Saban gave at Alabama. I know you have the video of all of them. We've seen very few of them. Even back when Crimson Tide Productions was putting out those really well put together videos recapping games every week. They only ever would show small snippets of Saban speaking to the team, and the make his ass quit. Every time I see that clip, I think, I bet it's only one of 100 incredible speeches, and we just haven't really seen most of the rest of them. Maybe that's not even the best one he ever gave, for all we know. And I mean, this guy was so good at that specific thing. I truly do think you could get a lot of Bama fans to pay you a monthly fee to go in there and watch those videos. And again, I know you've got them. They're sitting around somewhere. Just put them up, and I'll be the first subscriber. Charge me to watch them.
After they're done bottling their bottled water, they'll get to the streaming service with the Nick Saban speeches. It's a great idea, Matt. It's a great idea.
That's free from me. I ask nothing in exchange for that.
Well, maybe that would be enough to bring whatever 5-star safety from the portal to Alabama next year. If they can do that. I think it's a great idea. All right, your next pick, Matt.
All right, this is my final pick on my list, Ben, and I have to choose one moment because that's our format. Mm-hmm. So I don't want everybody to think that it's only about this. I'm trying to illustrate a larger point. But Nick Saban came in, and I know a big priority for him coming into Alabama was he wanted to build a great staff. He knew how important that was going to be for him. And he wasn't really able to get exactly everybody that he wanted at first coming in, whether that was because of money or timing or anything like that. But it didn't take him long to build a great staff that he felt great about. And then that sort of first round of guys got hired away. And a lot of coaches who reach that top level of success, that's really the end of the story for them. Their staff gets broken up, and they can't really ever recapture that magic again. But Nick Saban did it time after time after time. And I think the most impressive kind of revamp that he ever did during his tenure at Alabama was going from the very traditional pro style, dominating, joyless murder ball style of offense that you can probably attribute to a few people. Jim McElwain is certainly kind of the main guy I think of as being that guy, but I think Doug Nussmeier also was operating that for 2012, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. To go from that and to go out and hire Lane Kiffin to come in and run your offense, it was a huge swing. It was shocking to those of us, even those of us who were covering the team at the time. And I think it can be looked back on as a huge success for everybody involved. It changed the way people thought about Alabama as a place for offensive skill position players and quarterbacks. It changed Alabama's reputation within college football. I think they was starting to develop this reputation of, hey, if you play hurry up, no huddle against Alabama, they can't handle it. They're not adjusting to the future of the sport. Well, Alabama goes out and becomes a team like that, and they do it better than anybody else can do it. And I think it's such a perfect microcosm of Nick Saban's ability to keep changing the way he did things during his career as a head coach. And he was so good at picking the guys he needed to help him do that. The big graphic we all know that came out during the playoffs this last year was that I think by the second round of the playoffs, essentially, every coach in the college football playoff had worked for Nick Saban at some point. Kirby Smart, Steve Sarkisian, Lane Kiffin, Mario Cristobal, Dan Lanning, Kurt Signetti, all of these guys, and Pete Golding is now a head coach at a team that was in the college football playoffs. These guys were assistant coaches who learned from working for this guy, and they are now dominating college football. Everybody says the sport's totally changed because Nick Saban is gone. He's not really gone. He completely changed the face of the sport to the point that now it's just all him. It's like he took his power and broke it up into pieces, and now those pieces are all dominating the sport.
It's a great pick, Matt, and I love, like you said, the reason you pick it is not just because of Lane Kiffin himself, although he was very successful in Tuscaloosa, went to the playoff 3 straight years, won 3 straight SEC championships, won a national championship, coached a Heisman Trophy winner. Like his accolades speak for themselves. But you're right. Like the best point that you made there to me was the turnover in college football, especially among these staffs, is just unbelievable. And nobody saw it more than Nick Saban because of the tree that he was building. And everybody wanted to leave and go off. And it's like a much lesser degree. Like if you watch the Daily Show, right? Like all those reporters who went
Right.
off and became these huge stars, or Saturday Night Live is probably
Yeah.
the better example of that, where like they go off and be big movie stars. And the fact that you're able to keep going and to maintain the level of success that he was able to prove that he was clearly the common denominator for why
Yep.
Alabama was so successful and why those guys got the opportunities that they got. And there's no, other than Kirby Smart, I would still probably pick Lane Kiffin in terms of splashiness, in terms of like name recognition, in terms of the assistant coach that most people remember from the Nick Saban era. So, and you're right, like it shook the earth, at least in the border, within the borders of Alabama, and certainly in college football, when Nick Saban paired with Lane Kiffin. And Lord knows they had moments too, on the sideline and talking about each other. And he kind of loosened Saban up a little bit, I think, in some regards, pissed him off a lot.
Yeah.
So much so that Nick Saban sent him on his way days before a college football playoff final that Alabama ended up losing. And if Lane Kiffin was there, who knows what happens? But what an odd pair that worked for reasons that it probably shouldn't have. But like you said, it told a larger story, and that's why it's such a great pick.
Yeah, I mean, I still remember the news coming across the wire when it happened, and how weird we thought that all was. And I mean, it was immediately we knew that it would be amusing to go through it all, and it really was. But also, Ben, that was in the middle of a period of time where we go back and look. I mean, I know it seems a distant memory now, but Alabama had a real problem with Auburn at the time. Could not seem to get that monkey off its back.
Yep.
And Lane Kiffin arriving on the heels of the kick six, there were other moments that Gus Malzahn would have over Alabama, but under Lane Kiffin, I believe Alabama was 3-0 against Auburn in Iron Bowls. So they were at least for that period of time, they were able to sort of outpace what Gus Malzahn was doing, quite literally, especially in 2014. I mean, I think you can argue Alabama does not win that game unless they have a high-powered offense.
Great pick, Matt. And honestly, this pick, and Kiffin in particular, I think is a big reason, if not the ultimate reason, why my last pick happens. And my last pick here is something that impacts the program direct, like it's a little less direct, I think, than some of these other things, or it's less of a Nick Saban moment where you think, oh, Nick Saban, right? Like he did that. But my pick for the final entry here is when Bryce Young went number 1 overall in the NFL draft. Because think of everything that Nick Saban had done up to that point. He had done everything. He'd won national championships, conference championships, 4 Heisman trophies, all these All-Americans, countless NFL draft picks, countless first round NFL draft picks that again reinforced Alabama as this, not only this as this dominant dynastic college football program, but this conveyor belt from college to the NFL. But the thing he had never done up to this point was have the number 1 overall draft pick. He had guys who were close like Marcel Darius and Trent Richardson and some other guys that were in the top 10, but never number 1, because most of the time who gets picked? It's a quarterback. And without Lane Kiffin coming and changing Nick Saban, helping to change Nick Saban's philosophy and redirect the program with a more offensive-minded approach, knowing that you had to outscore your opponents, then Nick Saban doesn't recruit all of these 5-star quarterbacks and these guys who slung the ball, up to 40 times a game or more. Guys like, what basically became the quarterback era of Nick Saban's tenure in Tuscaloosa, when you had guys like Jalen Hurts, guys like Tua Tagovailoa, guys like Mac Jones, who were the focal point of these Nick Saban teams, who were still great defensively in some regards, but they were the stars. They were the faces of the programs, whereas guys like Rolando McClain and Terrence Cody and some of these other defensive players were the backbone of what Nick Saban was doing, winning with defenses and running the ball in a balanced attack. So you bring in a guy like Bryce Young, who is the best quarterback in the country in high school and is somebody who's going to play as soon as he gets to campus, even though he backed up Mac Jones for a season when Alabama won their last national championship. But he has an incredible career. His first year starting, he wins the Heisman Trophy. He goes to a national championship and nearly wins it, but doesn't. And then has another great statistical season and becomes the prohibitive favorite to be the number 1 overall pick, and ultimately is. And to me, that was just kind of like the last infinity stone in Nick Saban's gauntlet as a head coach at Alabama, something that had never happened when he had done everything. And it further proved that he could do anything. He could recruit any type of player. He could adopt any style when it came to needing to evolve and win at that level, whether it was shifting from a defense to offense, whether it was eventually adapting in the age of NIL or like whatever, and spread offenses, et cetera. You can go through the litany of things that Nick Saban had to adapt to while he was the coach at Alabama, and he did it, and he did it at the highest possible level. And so to me, when you have the number 1 overall draft pick after everything that you've already done up to that point, you've done it all. And that's why it's so important. And the impact that it ultimately had on Alabama was you can come to Alabama and be the number 1 guy. And that was huge.
Yeah. And I think you talked about Lane Kiffin being the kind of catalyst for that. And I think the path really more directly is, I think without Kiffin, Steve Sarkisian doesn't end up at Alabama as an offensive coordinator, and Steve Sarkisian is why Bryce Young ended up at Alabama. He was the guy that recruited him there, didn't coach him, but he was the reason why Bryce Young ends up in Tuscaloosa. And I will say this, Ben, I know we've got a great list here, and I feel good about it, and I feel good about capping it off with kind of what you could maybe consider the final big achievement for Alabama under Nick Saban. But I'll take the Steve Sarkisian mention to bring up my first honorable mention that didn't make the list, which is the 2020 season. And it's, Sarkisian was obviously a big part of that year, and Alabama's offense was totally unstoppable that whole season. But to me, I think you can make an argument that it's one of Nick Saban's great achievements at Alabama, because it was a time where the style of leadership that Saban brought to the program, the discipline, the commitment to doing every single thing the right way, gave maybe gave a bigger advantage to Alabama than it ever had before. It was this period of time where things were so chaotic everywhere. I mean, in the entire world, but particularly college football too that year. Nobody knew how you're supposed to go about this. Nobody knew how you're supposed to do things. And Nick Saban said, "Look, we're going to take the most conservative approach possible. We're going to do everything a certain way. Number one, because it's what's best for everybody involved, and it's what's best for everybody's health and safety, but also because it's going to give us an advantage as a program when we're holding everything together and following a procedure for everything that we do at a time when everything else is so chaotic and things are changing every day. We're going to keep doing everything the same way." And I think there really wasn't Alabama was so far and away the best college football program in 2020, and a big part of that is because no other program was even remotely as equipped as Alabama was under Nick Saban at staying focused and committed to doing things a certain way, even when everything else around you is crazy.
Yeah. When Alabama seemed to have been the best that they could be, the level that they reached in 2020 when they were seemingly unbeatable and no one could touch them, it was a sight to behold. And that's a great pick for an honorable mention, Matt. I have a couple too. We've mentioned Clemson 2008. That was critical. You beating Florida was on your list, thankfully. I mentioned his intro press conference. People should go back and watch that. It's pretty amazing. The through a tin horn rant, Matt, that was a good one that
Yeah,
we should
very
have
good.
considered. The onside kick was on my list, but that was part of your 2015 pick. And honestly, like this should probably be on the list. And I would happily sub out the make his ass quit speech, even though I think that's important. But 2nd and 26, right? The Alabama Georgia national title game, subbing Jalen out for Tua, true freshman Tua, comes in there, comes back on Georgia, wins with a walk-off championship. Nick Saban throws the headset, runs and celebrates in ways we'd never seen him before, wins a national championship game on the final play. Like that should probably be on this list. There are just so many that we could choose from. There are a handful of others that we could sub out. And I know that people watching this and listening to this are screaming at us and telling us, how could you leave this off? But if I had to take one of mine off and sub it for something else, it would be the 2nd and 26 game.
Yeah, I mean, again, hard. If you there's are there is there a boring national championship game for Alabama? I guess you could argue 2012 is boring because it was a complete blowout from start to finish. 2011 has its haters because the opponent never crossed the 50 basically, but I mean there's not a bad one really.
No, not at all. I think those two that you mentioned, plenty of other people would probably call those boring, and it's just like, oh no, Alabama wins again. But
Right.
for Alabama fans, they were the best thing they'd ever seen. And Alabama fans, with every national championship they won, the conversation ultimately became, I think this was Nick Saban's best coaching job. Or, I think this is my favorite national championship game, actually. And what a privileged position to be in. But Matt, I think we did well. Let me run through our picks. So the Nick Saban Hall of Fame, what we consider his top 10 best moments, I'll just run through them right now. In 2008, signing Julio Jones in that recruiting class. In 2008, the blackout game, beating Georgia in Athens. Also in 2008, his make his ass quit speech before the LSU game. In 2009, the SEC championship win versus Florida. 2009, the Mark Ingram Heisman Trophy win, the first of 4 while he was at Alabama. In 2009, the national title win versus Texas. In 2011, the response to the Tuscaloosa tornado in the subsequent season. In 2014, hiring Lane Kiffin. In 2015, the national title win versus Clemson. And then in 2023, Bryce Young going number 1 overall in the NFL draft. Are you happy with that list?
I love it. I mean, we had to leave a lot of things off, as you pointed out, but if we're going with 10, I mean, look, most fans would be lucky to see one thing like that happen during their time as a fan. So we're having to remember which ones we had to leave off the list.
All right, Matt. Well, thanks for doing this with me, and thanks for everybody for listening. And please share your picks in the comments. God knows that you have opinions on this, and call us idiots if you must. And I know that we'll probably be red in the face when we read what you have to say here, but we want you to be part of the conversation, and we want to hear your picks, and we'll share them on a future episode soon. But that's it. That's the Nick Saban Hall of Fame, and he's Matt Scalici. Matt, thanks as always for doing this. He's our producer on this show, and he'll be back soon. I've been Flanagan with AL.com. See you next time.